Hello, everyone. Welcome to all of you here today and everyone watching us on live stream as well. My name is Kelly Haley, and I'm a reference librarian here at the Fayetteville Public Library. Before I welcome our author, I would like to ask you to fill out one of those program evaluation slips. And on your way out, please drop it in that box on the back table. Your input really does help us with our programming, so we'd like to hear from you. DeLani Bartlette is our guest author today. She was always a reader, a writer, and became a fan of forensic crime shows on TV at a fairly early age. And this fascination eventually led to her becoming a crime writer, some true crime and some fiction. DeLani has a bachelor's and a master's degree in journalism from the University of Arkansas. She has written dozens of articles and essays on all subjects as a freelance writer. And then she was a regular contributor on Medium.com and wrote her first novel, Devil in Black Creek, back in 2017. She currently hosts a true crime show on YouTube and has written a new true crime book, The Dumond Affair, which is what we're talking about today. And that does involve Arkansas people, so it's especially fascinating. So please help me welcome DeLani Bartlette.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you can see short little me up here. I'm wearing my tallest platforms, but so thanks everyone for coming out. I really appreciate everyone, and I really appreciate the library for giving us this space and giving me this chance to talk a little bit about my book. She gave me a great introduction, but I would also just add that I was born and raised here in Northwest Arkansas. I've lived almost all of my life here in Northwest Arkansas, and as she said, I was very interested in forensic shows and just crime stories in general, because really what crime stories are about are justice, and about who gets justice and who doesn't. And that's what this book is really about. It's about who gets justice, who gets listened to, and who doesn't. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, and though this is an old crime, I think you'll find that it has repercussions that we're still feeling today. Let's see. Okay, that was not what I wanted to do. Okay. So I get often asked, why did I write this book? And the inciting incident, I guess you could say, was the Pizzagate shooting at Comet Ping Pong. That happened all the way back in 2016, and I know that was like 75 years ago. But just to refresh everyone's memory, it was based on this conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, and various other Democrats were performing satanic rituals and running a child sex trafficking ring out of the basement of a DC pizzeria, Comet Ping Pong. As for where this weird conspiracy theory started and how it spread, there's a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous, so I'm gonna try to summarize. So the first post that would eventually turn into the Pizzagate conspiracy theory was posted where else? 4chan, by a user who called themselves FBI Anon. The rumors spread throughout social media, up into Twitter and then Facebook, and that's, where it really, really got big. But it wasn't spreading just organically because so many people were interested in this. It was pushed out by armies, hundreds of Russian bots, GRU linked internet bots, as well as dozens and dozens of people associated with Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. So it wasn't just an organic thing. So it starts spreading throughout social media, starts getting really big once it hits Facebook, and from there, Alex Jones took up the cause on his show InfoWars. He dedicated multiple episodes to talking about the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, and of course he continued repeating things that he had said, he's been saying for years and years and years, calling Hillary Clinton a pedophile, a child murderer, and a psychopathic demon. And this is where Edgar Madison Welch comes in. So I'm going to read a little bit from my book about the actual Pizzagate shooting. By the fall of 2016, he had been consuming InfoWars obsessively, along with anything else he could find about Pizzagate. He texted some of this to his girlfriend in December, stating, "Looking up on Pizzagate and it makes me blank sick." She told him, "Stop consuming Pizzagate content." But he didn't take her advice. Finally, predictably, he felt like he needed to take action to save the children he believed were being victimized by Hillary Clinton and other elites. He reached out to friends to try and get them to come along with him for what he said would be a raid on a pedo ring, saying it would involve sacrificing the lives of a few for the lives of many, standing up against a corrupt system that kidnaps, tortures, and rapes babies and children in our own backyard. His friends declined his offer and sort of laughed it off. Welch, after all, had always been the type to do his own research and had subscribed to conspiracy theories for years, including 9/11 truthers. Quote, "I don't think he has very much faith in the media, but none of us do," an old friend of his told the Washington Post. On the morning of Sunday, December 6th, he told his family he had some things to do and set out on the 350-mile drive to D.C. to have a closer look and shine some light on it. He brought an AR-15 and a Colt 38 with him to, in other words, help rescue children. During the drive, he recorded a video for his daughters. I actually have a clip from that video, which I'm not sure how to actually make it play. I'm not sure how to make this clip play. Anyway, I'll just summarize it. He said he dedicates the video to his daughters. He says, quote, "I can't let you growing up in a world that's so corrupt by evil." And he says he has a duty to protect those who can't protect themselves. He arrived at Comet Ping Pong just before 3 that afternoon, when the restaurant was still fairly busy, including with kids who were there playing ping pong. Welch strode in carrying the AR-15, the 38 strapped to his thigh, and a folding knife in his pocket. He fired the rifle into the air. Then, as the customers and staff fled in terror for their lives, he calmly walked around investigating, moving furniture around and heading to the back of the restaurant. There, he shot the lock off a door, which only opened to a closet full of kitchen supplies. He then broke through another door, which only led outside to an alley. It didn't take long for the police to barricade the street and surround the building. Within a short period of time, Welch surrendered peacefully. He freely told police why he had come there. Even after his arrest, when talking to a reporter from the New York Times, he conceded that the intel wasn't 100% about Comet Ping Pong specifically, but he still believed in the underlying conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton and other prominent Democrats were running a child sex trafficking ring. If not at Comet Ping Pong, then somewhere else. Welch would end up pleading guilty to federal charges of assault with a dangerous weapon and transporting a firearm over state lines, and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. In the immediate aftermath of the Comet Ping Pong shooting, some platforms did try banning the hashtag Pizzagate, but the underlying conspiracy theory just morphed into something else as part of the sprawling web of delusions and conspiracy theories that would become QAnon. Really overthinking that.
I love God more than anything in this world.
This clip's only about a minute and a half long.
Grow up in a world that's so corrupt by evil. But at least standing up for you. For other children just like you.
And so that fellow, Edgar Madison Welch, he got out of prison in 2020, but just this last year, I think in January, he got pulled over for a probation violation, and he pulled a gun on the cops. And, you know, obviously they were like, put down the gun, put down the gun. He wouldn't put down the gun, and he was shot to death. So he's no longer with us. So that shooting was what really kind of got me. It was the coverage of that shooting that kind of got under my skin. So let me just read again. Despite the revelations in the wake of the Comet ping pong shooting, there are still hundreds of thousands of Americans who believe that Hillary Clinton and other prominent Democrats are part of a global cabal of Satan worshipers who traffic and kidnap children who they use to perform ritual human sacrifice, cannibalize for their adrenochrome, or sexually abuse, or some combination of all three. The various parts of this conspiracy theory are frequently repeated and alluded to by right-wing pundits as though they are just accepted truth. People outside the right-wing media bubble are often shocked by these beliefs. They don't understand how anyone could believe such obviously ridiculous allegations. But if, like me, you've been listening to right-wingers smear the Clintons and commit violent acts of terrorism against the left since the 1980s, the Pizzagate allegations, while more unhinged and unbelievable, were just the next step of the same old allegations and conspiracy theories they'd been accusing the Clintons of for decades. Pizzagate wasn't the first time those unhinged anti-Clinton conspiracy theories, concocted and spread by right-wing lunatics, bred into the real world with tragic consequences. So that was kind of the thing, was all the media who were covering it were just shocked. How could he possibly believe this crazy stuff? And I was finding myself yelling at the TV, that I've been hearing that for decades. This is not something new. So that's what was the impetus for me to really dig into this. And I wanted to focus on this particular crime, not because it wasn't the source of the conspiracy theories, but it was swept up into the conspiracy theories and had really tragic consequences. So the crime that I'm talking about, now this is a later picture of Ashley Stevens when she's in her 20s. I don't have any pictures of her when she was younger. But let's just go back to the original crime that Dumond committed. It should have just been some obscure crime that happened in South Arkansas in the 80s. We're going to go back to Forest City, Arkansas, in 1984. Ashley Stevens at that time was 17 years old. She was a cheerleader and the older daughter of one of the town's most prominent businessmen. Her father, Stevie Stevens III, owned a funeral home and was, prominent pillar of the community type. He was also a distant relative of Bill Clinton, who was the governor at the time, and that's important. So on September 11th, she walked home from school, and it was the one day of the week that she came home to an empty house. And let me go ahead and read. And I'm not going to get graphic about the crime, so if you find yourself going, oh, wait a minute, what's she fixing to say? Don't worry, I'm not going to get graphic. So again, September 11th, she walks home from school. Only minutes after she arrived, a thin man with a scraggly beard and piercing blue eyes walked in through the side door. He had a paper bag in one hand and a pistol in the other. She said he tied her hands behind her back and asked her where her car keys were. She told him, and he forced her at gunpoint to get into her car. He made her lie down in the seat and drove her to a nearby secluded area, the gun pointed at her the entire time. Once there, he got out, took her by the arm, and pulled her out of the car. He led her down the path a little way to a spot where he declared, "This will do," and set her down on the ground. He took off her jeans and underwear and placed them under her, then took a butcher knife out of the paper sack. "Don't worry," he said to her, "I'm not going to hurt you." He used the knife to cut her sweater up the middle and down both sleeves, nicking her shoulder in the process. Then he cut her bra off. Then he sexually assaults her. After he's done, she begged for her life, claiming her mom had cancer, again trying to play on his sympathies. It must have worked because he allowed her to get dressed and get back in the car. As he was trying to pull away, though, he had trouble getting the car out of the muddy spot where he'd parked. She said he tried to back up but couldn't, just spinning the tires on the grass. So instead, he drove forward around a large tree and through some bushes. The man drove her home the entire time, threatening her that if she told anyone about what happened, he would kill her. Ashley then watched him get into his truck, a red Ford with a missing tailgate and a broken right headlight, and drive off. The time was approximately 3:25. Later, when she goes to the police, she was able to describe her attacker clearly, especially his big, quote, crystal blue eyes, as well as the gun he'd threatened her with. She gave detailed directions to where he had driven her, leading the police to the spot where she'd been raped. There, the police found an area in the grass that had been disturbed as though a struggle had taken place. There was a roll of packing tape on the ground, as well as fresh tire tracks in the grass, which appeared to corroborate her statement. Back at the station, she was shown multiple lineups, but she couldn't positively identify her attacker out of any of them. One fellow fit the description of her attacker, but she didn't think it was him. 6 weeks went by without a suspect in her case, until one late October day when she was riding in a friend's car downtown. When they slowed down at an intersection, quote, "I looked over and there he was," she said. "We were turning left, waiting for the traffic to go by, and he passed us on the right." Ashley saw her attacker driving by in a red Ford pickup truck, just like the one she had seen driving away on the day of her attack, though now the tailgate had been replaced. Her friend wrote down the license plate number, and they both went back to the police with this new information. Using the registration information on the truck, police were able to identify her attacker as Wayne Eugene Dumond. So at that point, Wayne Dumond was married to a good church-going woman named Dusty, and they lived on the outskirts of Forest City with their 3 kids from previous marriages. But that good family man type of act was covering up a pretty long history. Back when he was a teenager, he grew up in DeWitt, and the people around DeWitt knew him as trouble. He was known for heavy drinking and heavy drugging, and there are multiple women who lived there, went to school with him, etc., who accused him of sexually assaulting them. He was drafted into Vietnam in the 60s, and then when he came back, he would brag to people that his unit had come upon this village in Cambodia that wasn't on the map. So they just burned the village to the ground to, quote, correct the map. Now, he lies a lot, so I kind of don't think that that was actually a true story. But the fact that he would brag about something like that tells you something about his character and his personality. So later, when he was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, he and 3 other guys lured a 4th man to a secluded area and beat him to death with pipes and hammers, okay? But when Wayne, was brought in for questioning or whatever, he was able to cop this really sweet plea deal where in exchange for his testimony against the other 3 co-conspirators, all the charges against him were dropped. So he was never charged, never convicted of this murder, but he confessed to it. So at this point, he's now a murderer. Oh yeah, and throughout the 70s, after that, there were at least 3 other women who reported that he either attempted to or did commit rape, only one of which was ever prosecuted, and that was an attempted kidnapping at knife point. He was in Seattle in a mall parking lot, and this woman said he just grabbed her up and held a knife to her throat and was trying to get her into his van, and she, screamed and fought, and so was able to get free. So it was just an attempted kidnapping at that point, and he got 18 months in mandatory counseling, not very much. So this is the background that we know about him. So anyway, after Ashley goes to the cops with his license plate number, he was arrested for kidnapping and rape. And he was out on bond awaiting trial when probably the most well-known part of this case occurred. And this was on Thursday, March 7th of 1985, and I'll just read to you. In a statement to Arkansas State Police Lieutenant Phil Osterman, Wayne gave his first account of what had happened. According to this, his original statement, between 1:30 and 1:45 that afternoon, I had just come back from my mailbox up on the paved road. I was in the kitchen putting up some dishes, and two men came in the unlocked front door. There were two of them, a short one, 5'9" or so, and about 150 pounds. He had a .38 caliber revolver, blue, with about a 4-inch barrel. It had brown grips, probably plastic. He was wearing a blue and brown plaid shirt, blue jeans, and old high-top work shoes. Both of the men had on stocking masks and blue-green rubber gloves, not surgical gloves because they fit too loose. The tall one was about 6'2" or 6'3". He was medium built, about 180 or 190 pounds. They pointed the gun at me and motioned for me to lay down on the floor. They tied my hands behind my back and my feet together, then tied my hands and my feet all together behind me. I thought they were going to shoot me. I was on my side, and the small one put one knee on my shoulder and the gun to the side of my head. The big one pulled my pants down. He had a knife in his hand when he came in. The blade was about 4 inches long. It looked like stainless steel. The handguard was stainless steel or chrome. As he cut on me, I blacked out for a little while. I was screaming and hollering and don't remember too much. As they were leaving, the small one said, "Good job." The other one said, "Mr. C will be proud." And so that brings us to Sheriff Coolidge Conley. So Conley arrives on the scene after Lieutenant Osterman, passing the ambulance as it sped toward the hospital. He walked into a house that looked like an abattoir with blood and tissue underfoot. But as Osterman left the scene to follow the ambulance to the hospital, Conley waded into it. He first picked up a blood-soaked bit of twine, no doubt cut off of Wayne, then dropped it. Then he spotted two pink globs of tissue, Wayne's severed testicles. Conley immediately scooped them up into a matchbox and left the scene. So, in case it's not obvious, the sheriff of St. Francis County at the time, Coolidge Conley, was not a very typical lawman. He was almost cartoonishly corrupt. This is from an advertisement for a 10-part series that Jack Hill with KAIT did on Coolidge Conley about all of his numerous crimes. He was like extorting black-owned businesses, running illegal gambling debts. He was running illegal whiskey running. He was beating up prisoners in custody, insurance fraud. Like, imagine the most cartoonishly corrupt Southern sheriff that you can, and that's literally Conley. So, but what he's most known for, again, I'll just read a little bit. It was just his swaggering hubris that is to thank for the most well-known and bizarre fact about this case, because Wayne Dumont's testicles never made their way into any evidence locker. Instead, Conley kept them in his office, preserved in a jar of formaldehyde, for quite some time. He would take them out and brag to anyone who asked, "This is what happens when you rape a cheerleader in my county," before eventually flushing them down the toilet in front of a reporter. So, Wayne would later win a civil suit against Coolidge Conley for doing that, but when he stood trial for Ashley's kidnapping and rape, the judge did not allow anything about the castration or the testicle display because it didn't really have anything to do with whether or not he actually committed the crime against Ashley. So that was excluded from court. So besides Ashley's testimony, there was plenty of corroborating evidence. Like I said, the tire marks and the packing tape at the scene, the cut on Ashley's shoulder. And now, since this was at this point, 1985, I believe, DNA testing wasn't a thing, but they were able to do certain kinds of serological tests, and they pointed very squarely at Wayne Dumont, to the point of like, sure, it wasn't as accurate as DNA, but the possibility that she just picked some rando off the street who just so happened to fit all these very specific profiles, was beyond reasonable doubt. So, he swore, "With God as my witness, I did not rape that girl," but he was convicted and he was sentenced to life plus 20 years. So, while Wayne was trying to, appeal his verdict, his wife Dusty was on the outside fighting for her man. I cannot stress enough just how much of a force Dusty Dumond was for Wayne's cause. And I really think that she was really instrumental in bringing it to people who could then bring it to a wider audience. She was so crazy. She wrote a letter to the Stevens family, and she even called Ashley on the phone to try and convince them that Ashley was really mistaken, that it couldn't have been Wayne. He was a good Christian man. So if that tells you the kind of chutzpah that this woman had. She recruited some local media figures to her cause. I mentioned the investigative reporter Jack Hill from KAIT out of Jonesboro, Bob Starr, the editor of the Arkansas Democrat, and reporter Guy Reel of the Memphis Commercial Appeal. A Guy would later go on to write a book about the whole thing, and it was really just repeating the allegations that she was just mistaken, Wayne was an innocent man, and this was all just a political hit job. The book was called Unequal Justice, Wayne Dumond, Bill Clinton, and the Politics of Rape in Arkansas. That's the full name. So anyway, those people were coming at it from the angle that because Coolidge Conley was like so inept and so corrupt that clearly the investigation had been botched. But for some reason, because Ashley was a distant relative of Bill Clinton was turning a blind eye. Coolidge Conley just wanted to get somebody in jail because it was an election year. And so, for whatever reason, Bill Clinton wasn't going to help this guy. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but, you know, that was basically where they were going with it. And, but then, trying to get to my notes to kind of show what's next. But she also had some other very important allies besides just people in the sort of mainstream media. Anybody recognize this guy that's circled? I'm J. Cole. Okay, I guess I'm just the only old Fayettevillian here. So, like I said, the connections that she made with the reporters and the editor were pretty effective in sowing doubt in the minds of otherwise rational people. But she had other allies, particularly evangelicals and especially Baptists. She reached out to Baptist churches all throughout the state of Arkansas. She organized letter writing campaigns. She did fundraising for his defense. And generally, they were just putting pressure on elected officials to get Wayne released. And it's also important to note here that, you know, in the 80s, the State Baptist Convention was the most powerful voting bloc in the state of Arkansas, okay? But there was one Baptist in particular who would be the most instrumental in getting Wayne set free, and that was this fellow right here, the Reverend J. Cole. And so let me talk a little bit about J. Cole. And that's kind of, throughout this book, it's like character after character after character. All the people involved in this, every one of them is crazy in a different kind of way. And so here's J. Cole. Cole, Thelma, and their 3 children had moved to the Fayetteville area in 1976 to a ranch-style brick house set far back from a dirt road in rural Washington County, west of the city limits. There he founded Mission Fellowship Bible Church, a fundamentalist Baptist church, in his home. He also started a business, Mission Service Supply, which sold blank tapes and high-speed duplication equipment to churches, missionary groups, and other religious organizations. And this is important. This business, which he'd run some version of for years, put him in contact with a lot of other clergy, especially evangelicals, since in those pre-social media days, the way to get your message out was to create and mass duplicate cassettes or VHS tapes and then distribute them to churches and other organizations. But most of his time was devoted to his third passion, his crusade to put his God back into American government. He first founded Save Our Nation, a political action committee to, quote, help defend our United States of America from its most dreaded enemy, secular humanism, end quote, and to recruit, train, and promote Christians into leadership positions in government. It was also the name of his AM radio talk show, where he and his occasional co-host, Johnny Tittle, railed against secular humanism, feminism, homosexuality, and the God-hating ACLU. Later, in the early 1990s, he was a founding member of and served as chaplain for the Washington County Militia, whose mission was not only to protect their God-given Second Amendment rights, but also to fight tyranny through the use of arms. Such tyranny, according to their website, includes socialist enemies and the government who promote a Luciferian New World Order. Even if you didn't attend his church or listen to his show, most anyone who lived in Northwest Arkansas in the late 1980s or early 90s knew who J. Cole was. And yeah, he would have these crazy commercials that would air on 4029 on Saturday mornings during cartoons. Like, if you remember back in the day, if you wanted to watch cartoons, you had to do it on Saturday morning. And so you'd be watching like Bugs Bunny or whatever, and then like one of his crazy rants would come on in the commercials. It was absolutely insane. He would also do all kinds of stuff like, it wasn't just his weirdly terrifying commercials or his rabidly right-wing talk show that made J. Cole into something of a local personality. Because he didn't just rant on his commercials and radio show, he frequently took his reactionary beliefs to the streets of Fayetteville. Home to the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, like most college towns, skews young and liberal, so Cole had plenty to get offended by. He would regularly show up to protest local pride events and, in the words of one longtime resident, act like an asshole. His antics led many to refer to him as the proto-Fred Phelps. He also regularly started beefs with the students at Fayetteville High School. And one, he got mad at the yearbook staff because they allowed a local store named Condom Sense to purchase an ad. The school didn't cow to his threats, though. Instead, they told him if he didn't like it, he could purchase an ad for himself. So he did, a large spread advertising abstinence. Another beef he had with them was similar. He wanted the school newspaper to publish a whole insert on the dangers of homosexuality. The pamphlet had some pretty graphic and incorrect descriptions of gay sex in it, including the phrase fecal swallowing, so the staff rejected it. Thanks to these kind of antics, at least in Fayetteville, yanking his chain became something of a local pastime. One high school student made a t-shirt with the words, "I am the anti-Cole" on it. Condom Sense adopted the unofficial slogan, proudly pissing off J. Cole since 1993. People would use J. Cole as their usernames on bulletin board systems and other pseudonymous platforms just so that they could say his signature catchphrase, "I'm J. Cole." But outside of the Fayetteville area, he wasn't known by many. He seemed like just one more right-wing loony. Except he did have one very important friend, a fellow pastor named Mike Huckabee, but we'll get to that in a minute. Dusty apparently impressed Cole and everyone else that she and Wayne were good Christians with a notable history in the Baptist community, heading the youth department of a church in Forest City. But maybe more than Dusty's lobbying or Wayne's declarations of faith, what convinced Cole was his absolute hatred of the Clintons. At this point, the only allegation about Clinton's involvement in the case was that because Ashley was related to him, and that Con Lee, who was also a Democrat but more of the Dixiecrat persuasion, had railroaded Wayne. But in Cole's worldview, it had to be something much more sinister. Bill and Hillary stood for everything that he and most fundamentalist evangelicals opposed, part of the, quote, pro-abortion Democratic Party, feminist, and pro-civil rights. Cole was, in private at least, quite racist. And of course, since Wayne was a good Christian, there was no way he could be guilty of such an awful crime. Cole said he conducted an investigation into the case by questioning 100 people, mostly other evangelicals, about Wayne's case. Quote, "I talked to DeMond's pastor and the high school principal of the school. Not a single one of them said anything bad about him," Cole said. So Cole agreed to become Wayne's spiritual director in prison. He told the Los Angeles Times reporter, "We'd sit and talk and pray for 2 hours, and other times he'd call me on the phone a lot, collect. He was just wanting to know if I'd made any headway finding people who could help his situation, he said. He was a nice fella, and it was hard to believe he could have done what he was accused of doing. Maybe thanks to Cole's influence, Wayne stopped getting in fights and instead got very religious. Besides ministering to Wayne in prison, Cole joined Dusty in actively campaigning for his release, organizing letter-writing campaigns, and talking about it on his radio show. While there aren't any records of the show in existence, tracking the spread of misinformation like a virus points to Cole's radio show as the patient zero in expanding Clinton's supposed role in Wayne's case. It was around this time and in this evangelical AM talk radio show media sphere that Clinton went from simply being the powerful man the victim was related to into actively participating in railroading Wayne into prison or even personally arranging his castration, or both. Cole's rabidly right-wing audience had been primed by years of propaganda to believe the worst about Bill Clinton, so it wasn't a hard sell for them. So there's J. Cole with Mike Huckabee. So like I said, the evangelicals had been primed by years of propaganda since at least the 70s, but for sure since 1980 when the Moral Majority was founded. They were taught that Democrats and liberals were working for Satan himself and that they were trying to tear down the foundations of society. Here in Arkansas, most of that was aimed at Bill Clinton since he was first elected governor in the late 70s. He was, like I said, everything they hated. He was a draft dodger. I mean, he wasn't technically a draft dodger. He got a legal deferment for going to college, but in their mind, that's a draft dodger. And he had also spoken out against the Vietnam War. He was opposed to it. He was also a civil rights supporter. He had a lot of support with the African American community in Arkansas. And he was married to a feminist who kept a career, didn't wear makeup, and kept her last name. Like, can you believe that? So it was easy for them to believe Cole's framing that this was a case of a good Christian man who had been railroaded and horrifically mutilated by some powerful, godless liberal. So, you know, up until 1991, this was all kind of a tempest in a teapot. It was just, you know, Arkansas. But Bill Clinton decided to run for president. And he had actually caught the eye of some national Republicans in 1988. He had been invited to speak at the DNC, the Democratic National Convention that year, and had made a really big impression. Like, lots of people were like, whoa, you know, watch him, he's a comer, you know. And so, in particular, he caught the attention of Lee Atwater. If you don't know who that is, he was the former head of the RNC and advisor to Reagan and the first President Bush. Atwater saw that Clinton was a real threat, and he wanted to nip his political career in the bud. Again, there's a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous, but it was Atwater's involvement that eventually led to the suit against Clinton that then gave rise to the Paula Jones sexual harassment suit. Again, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff because it's just crazy. Like, again, I had to write a whole book just to, you know, follow all these crazy threads. So anyway, during his first presidential run in 91 and 92, the lieutenant governor, Jim Guy Tucker, was often left as acting governor in Arkansas while Clinton was out on the campaign trail. And it was during one of those times when Jim Guy Tucker was acting governor that Tucker caved to the public pressure here in Arkansas. And he didn't pardon Wayne, but he reduced his sentence down to a little over 39 years, which still, you know, pretty long sentence. But the important thing is that by doing that, he made Wayne eligible for parole. Again, I'm skimming over a lot of stuff, but that brings us to the Arkansas Project. It was basically a right-wing smear operation that was designed just to dig up any kind of dirt they could find about Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton. Because of that, because of the Arkansas Project, Wayne's cause kind of got scooped up and boosted into the national media. He became kind of a minor cause celeb among the right as a supposed victim of the Clinton machine. They wrote about him in the New York Post quite a bit. The New York Post was probably the one that wrote about him the most, but there was also an article or two by Ward Harkavy in the Village Voice taking up his cause. But also from the Arkansas Project, we got the Whitewater investigation. Again, like so much, but there had been a special prosecutor assigned to it named Robert Fisk, and he did a preliminary investigation and he cleared the Clintons of any wrongdoing. But the Republicans in Congress were like, no, that won't do. And so they pressured Janet Reno, or the law was changing at that time. They put pressure on to have a new independent counsel named, and that independent counsel was Ken Starr. And his assistant, just a point of trivia, was Brett Kavanaugh. So Ken Starr's Whitewater investigation ended up being the longest, most expensive independent counsel in United States history. The investigation swept up a lot of people, including Jim Guy Tucker. And again, I'm skimming over a whole lot because this is also another whole huge kerfluffle, I guess you could call it. But because Jim Guy Tucker had been convicted of a felony, he could no longer serve as governor. So he had to step down, and that meant that the then Lieutenant Governor, Mike Huckabee, got promoted to governor. And so that brings us back to Wayne Dumont's case. One of the first things that Mike Huckabee did after he finally became governor was to pay back his old friend, J. Cole, and he announced that he was going to pardon Wayne Dumont. Now, clearly, he had been living kind of in a bubble because he was not expecting what happened whenever he made this announcement. So let me just read a little bit about that. After he made his announcement, Ashley Stevens, along with 20 women members of the State House of Representatives and several members of law enforcement, staged a protest against Huckabee's decision on the steps of the state Capitol building, sparking renewed media interest in the case. The elders of Graham Memorial Presbyterian Church wrote to Huckabee and forwarded their letter to local newspapers, urging him, "Don't free Dumont." Their letter ends with, "He will hurt someone else's child, Governor, if you let him go. You'll see." In an effort to stem the political fallout, the investigative writer Murray Wass wrote, Huckabee and his staff agreed to meet with Ashley, her family, and Fletcher Long, the prosecuting attorney who had sent Wayne to prison, to hear their side of the story. Ashley, who was now 29, tried to persuade Huckabee that Wayne was a dangerous man and should not be set free. But Huckabee had fully bought into the lie that Wayne was innocent and that Ashley was mistaken about who had raped her. So she got right up in Huckabee's face, only inches away from him, and told him, "This is how close I was to Wayne Dumont. I will never forget his face. And now I don't want you to ever forget my face." Ashley wasn't Wayne's only victim to plead with Huckabee to reconsider freeing Wayne. Wass's investigation turned up letters that Wayne's earlier victims had sent to the governor. The DeWitt woman whom Wayne had raped at knife point wrote to him expressing her guilt. "I feel that if he is released, it is only a matter of time before he commits another crime, and fear that he will not leave a witness to testify against him next time," she wrote. Her daughter, who had only been 3 years old at the time and sleeping in the bed next to her when her mother was attacked, wrote to Huckabee as well, begging him as a fellow Baptist to at least call her and talk to her. He never did. Despite all this, Wass wrote that the Stevenses and Long came away from that meeting frustrated that Huckabee seemed to know so little about the case. Wass quotes Long. He, Huckabee, kept insisting that there was DNA evidence that has since exonerated Dumont, when that very much wasn't the case. No matter that that wasn't true, we couldn't seem to say or do anything to disabuse him of that notion. Wass also quotes an anonymous state official who advised Huckabee on the case. Quote, "I don't believe that he had access to or read the law enforcement records or parole commission's files, even by then. the official said. He already seemed to have made up his mind, and his knowledge of the case appeared to be limited to a large degree as to what people had told him, what J. Cole had told him, and what he had read in the New York Post. So, seeing as how there was some blowback when he announced his decision to try and pardon Wayne, he decided to do some backdoor dealings to make this happen. I go into it in more detail, but he secretly and illegally pressured the parole board to parole Wayne, because that way he could get released without Huckabee having to do anything. It wouldn't be his fault, essentially. So it's all very crazy cloak and dagger type stuff. But yeah, eventually he gets paroled, and that brings us to the year 2000. So since I assume you've at least read the back cover copy, you know what happens next. Once Wayne got his parole transferred to Missouri in 2000, he raped and murdered Carol Sue Shields. Less than a year later, he did the same thing to Sarah Andrusek. He was caught by DNA evidence literally the day after he murdered Sarah Andrusek. He did that on June 21st, 2001. He was arrested. The DNA results came back, and he was immediately arrested on June 22nd. So anyway, they had happened in two separate counties. So first, the DNA evidence was for Carol Sue Shields' case. He was arrested, tried, and convicted, sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, right? But for Sarah Andrusek's case, that had happened in Platte County. So Carol Sue Shields was in Clay County, and Sarah Andrusek was in Platte County. So different prosecutors, right? It's the Kansas City area. It's a big sprawling metro. So anyway, because Wayne was already in prison for life without parole, the prosecutor in Platte County, Eric Zond, there wasn't really a sense of urgency. And I can't really blame him. As a prosecutor, you've got to prioritize the cases to get people off the streets who are a danger to the public. And since Wayne was already in prison, it wasn't really that urgent. So apparently Zond claims he was in the process, he was about ready to, bring the charges forward when Wayne Dumond died in prison. And I find it really kind of poetic justice that he had lied so much, and what he died from was cancer of the vocal cords. But I want to note here, the reason he was set free, right, was because of these conspiracy theories that all these people, including Mike Huckabee, believed. After this happened, no one, not one person, came forward to apologize or set the record straight or do any kind of retraction. It just sort of got, swept under the rug and forgotten about. However, there was, kind of almost sort of a little bit of accountability, because in 2008, when Mike Huckabee decided to run for president, his political opponents were able to dig up this, and that's what was called the Dumond affair. So Dumond's crime and then Mike Huckabee's role in getting him freed so that he could go on and kill these two women, that was what the Dumond affair was. And so his political opponents brought this forward into the media, and that's what tanked his political ambitions. However, he's now our ambassador to Israel, so isn't that great? Oh yeah, this, okay.
She is steeped in controversy, steeped in sleaze. That's why they don't want us to look at her record.
Well, I think it's worth remembering. After her healthcare fiasco, the Clinton team put her to the side.
Certainly, that's what she's learned a lot from that experience. It was a failure. She knows it was a
story, lie about anything, as long as it serves a purpose, you know. And the American people can catch on to it. I can't think of any other politician in history who has shown such a disrespect and contempt for the Constitution and the rule of law. That's Hillary. And I represented Richard Nixon's best friend. And I knew Richard Nixon. And I'll tell you something. She's no Richard Nixon. She's worse.
Whereabouts? Vindictive, venal, sneaky, ideological, intolerant, lying, scared to hell.
I am sick and tired of people who say that if you debate and you disagree with this administration, somehow you're not patriotic. And we should stand up and say, we are Americans and we have a right to debate and disagree with any administration.
Okay, so that was a clip from the trailer for Hillary, the movie. So I was just talking about, this was 2008. Mike Huckabee was running in the primary. He got tanked because of the Dumont affair coming public. But this was also when Hillary Clinton was running on the Democratic side in the primary. And so this group called Citizens United created this quote-unquote documentary, which is literally just an hour and a half of right-wing pundits. You saw Ann Coulter there, you know, there was Bob Novak, and a few like disgruntled former employees from Arkansas just talking about how evil Hillary Clinton is, okay? So Citizens United, they're a propaganda factory. Like, they make a bunch of these quote-unquote documentaries. You know, they churn them out like every year. But so they had wanted to have this aired on a cable TV station. And the FCC, or I'm sorry, the FEC, Federal Election Commission, I can't remember if it was the FCC or the FEC, but it was ruled that, look, this is electioneering. This is basically just an hour and a half campaign commercial, and it's against the law, current law, to do that. And so this group, Citizens United, took it to court, and it went all the way to Supreme Court. And if that name, Citizens United, is ringing a bell, that was the Supreme Court case that declared that corporations are people and money is speech. And it was all so that this group could air this anti-Hillary Clinton show, documentary, they call it. So the reason I bring that up is because, again, it's part of that same thread of how the anti-left, anti-Clinton, anti-Democrat propaganda is the through line at every step of eroding our democracy. And the Citizens United, I mean, ever since that was decided, it was in 2010, we have had just floods of money and dark money into our campaigns. Every year, it's just more and more. And who do we have to thank for this? Citizens United. So that is just, you know, a taste of Hillary, the movie. I actually sat and watched the whole thing. And it's basically just an hour and a half of that. It literally is just right-wing pundits talking about how she's evil, she's a liar, she's psychopathic, she's power-hungry, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, how is this a documentary? Like, I could just get, you know, 10 people to talk about how some certain person is a terrible person, like, so. And so, that brings us forward to 2016. After the Pizzagate shooting, the hashtag kind of sank into oblivion, but like the villain in every good horror movie, it could not be killed. It just morphed into something else. And so I want to read a little bit about QAnon here. The QAnon phenomenon is difficult to explain. In his docuseries Into the Storm, director Cullen Hoback describes QAnon, the phenomenon, not the 4chan poster, as part interactive game, part religion, and part political movement. It started in mid-October of 2017 with an anonymous post on one of 4chan's message boards. The poster, Q, claimed to be a high-ranking government official with Q-level security clearance, and they were posting allegedly highly classified government information. But the posts weren't information, really. They were mostly collections of short, cryptic phrases and/or a series of open-ended questions. Like the writings of Nostradamus, Q drops could be interpreted in an infinite number of ways, and literally any detail could be taken as confirmation. The vagueness of the posts and allusions to existing conspiracy theories attracted conspiracy-minded people to connect the dots, as they put it, and draw conclusions based on nothing more than sloppy pattern recognition. This connecting the dots led to a rise of a class of what they call bakers, bloggers, vloggers, podcasters, and YouTubers who drew huge followings translating and discussing Q drops and tying them into events in the news or biblical prophecies. In fact, QAnon has been called the Uber conspiracy theory in that it incorporates nearly every other conspiracy theory through history, from the centuries-old anti-Semitic accusations of blood libel to flat earth theories to belief that coronavirus vaccines are really a secret way for Bill Gates to implant humanity with microscopic tracking devices. But the central belief that all the others lead to is just Pizzagate 2.0, which itself is just an amped-up version of the myths that fundamentalist evangelicals have been pushing about the left since the 1980s. QAnon followers literally believe that hundreds of celebrities and Democrats are part of a cabal of Satanists engaged in child sex trafficking, murder, and cannibalism, specifically harvesting and drinking adrenochrome. Hillary Clinton figures prominently in it. If the QAnon universe were a video game, she would be the final boss. Followers also believe that Trump was and still is waging a secret war against these deep state enemies, and one day he will have them all arrested and publicly executed in an apocalyptic event they call the Storm. So, on January 6th, it wasn't just one troubled young man whipped into a righteous frenzy to go save innocent children. It was thousands of people who believed they were doing God's work, stopping the steal by the satanic pedophiles of the deep state. For months beforehand, people who'd been paying attention to Trump's campaign warned that something bad was probably going to happen on January 6th. The winks to QAnon, the violent rhetoric circulating through the right-wing media, but once again, those voices weren't listened to. And it's why I think the Dumond affair is instructive. I see the same pattern playing out again with the January 6th rioters. People believed wild conspiracy theories and committed acts of violence because of them. A powerful man who rose to power thanks to those conspiracy theories set the attackers free. And those attackers, just like Wayne Dumond, have gone on to hurt more people. According to Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, as of June, at least 10 January 6th insurrectionists that were pardoned have already been rearrested, charged, or sentenced for other crimes, including plotting the murder of FBI agents, child sexual assault, possession of child sexual abuse material, and reckless homicide while driving drunk. But their voices, the voices of people who tried to warn against this, were not listened to. And so that brings us to today, 9 months into his second term. The Epstein file scandal seems to be the one thing he can't seem to get out from under. And I think it's because what a lot of reporters and pundits aren't getting, the same thing that they didn't get with Pizzagate and January 6th. Trump's strongest supporters are still conspiracy theorists. Even if they don't outright identify as QAnon followers, they believe at least some of its underlying conspiracy theories, including and especially the global cabal of satanic pedophile conspiracy theory. So this whole thing has kind of put Trump in a bind. He played footsie with these conspiracy theorists during his campaign because he needed their devotion and their furious hatred of Democrats. But now he's like caught the tiger by the tail. He's actually in a position of power to where he could release these files, but he knows he can't because he was really, really, really involved with Epstein. So this is the one thing that I don't think he's going to be able to gaslight his way out of for that very reason. And so here's what he's trying to do.
He was declared the frontrunner for the New York Senate seat back in 1999. Days later, his plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean, and his rival, Hillary Clinton, was elected senator. Mary Mahoney was a Clinton White House intern. She knew enough of the inner workings of Bill's sexual advancements to be a star witness during the Clinton impeachment trials. She was brutally executed at a Starbucks she was managing in 1997. In 1993, White House counsel Vince Foster was found dead in Fort Marcy Park near D.C. He supposedly killed himself, and among a lengthy list of potential foul play, the bullet was never found. Then there's David Dugal, a key witness to White House prosecutors. He was serving his 3-year sentence for bank fraud at the Fort Worth Federal Medical Center in Texas. And just before he was to give a testimony before the grand jury, McDougal suffered a heart attack and saw grave findings. In 2013, Walter Scheid, a White House staff hired under Bill Clinton, joined the list. His body was found at the bottom of a river, nearly 2 miles from the base of the trail he was reportedly hiking. An autopsy determined that Scheid's death was accidental drowning, but he might have known too much. 27-year-old Democratic National Committee staffer Seth Rich was shot and killed in D.C. this year. There is speculation that he was the source of the controversial leaked emails allegedly sent by DNC staffers, and that he may have been murdered in retaliation. Then Sean Lucas, the lead attorney in a fraud case against the DNC, was found lying on the bathroom floor by his girlfriend when she returned home on August 2nd. His death was reported classified, pending the results of an autopsy. To this day,
So you saw that was posted by Donald Trump on his Twitter knockoff. Do any of those things ring any bells for anyone? Seth Rich, Vince Foster, all that. Yeah, so this is all stuff that was taken from this conspiracy theory called the Clinton body count, which was started in the early 90s in the wake and probably in coordination with the Arkansas Project. And so don't you find it interesting? This was posted in May, okay, so this isn't like recent. But isn't it interesting that now he's in office and he's starting to get these calls to release the Epstein files? He's trying to like, oh, it's the Clintons, it's the Clintons, it's the Clintons. And in fact, after he posted that at a press conference, there was this far-right blogger who basically teed up Carolyn Levitt to talk about this, basically, you know, saying, oh, isn't it curious that Epstein also, you know, and so that was a clear and obvious attempt to try and redirect the Epstein files scandal back to the Clintons. And in fact, just yesterday, I had to add this at the last minute because I just heard about it. It was either yesterday or the day before, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, told a reporter that Trump was really an FBI informant who was trying to take this stuff down, literally just repeating the QAnon conspiracy theory. So, you know, it's all these things that they all tie back to the same forces, the same conspiracy theories for the same reasons. But the problem being that these conspiracy theories were around long before Trump or even Q. So it's kind of like this might be the one thing that he can't really lie or gaslight his way out of. So again, just this was why I felt the need to write this book. I wanted to put all of this into context. And, you know, there's probably not going to be any accountability for any of these people, but I hope that the information and this book can at least shed some light on what I consider to be the longest lasting and most harmful conspiracy theory in American history. So, any questions, thoughts? Okay, well, I will be back here. I have books for sale. If you already have a book, I'll be happy to sign for you. But yeah, I'll be back here. Thank you so much for coming.